After agreeing to come on today's show, Lee has now pulled out at the very last minute. So, here's the empty chair he was meant to sit in, on how interested he really is in gaining your support at the election. Final word from Lee Anderson. No, nothing to say, Lee? Because he's chicken. Hello, this is Never Mind The Ballots. I'm Harry Cole. Once again, I'll be looking at all things politics with my team from The Sun, with no subject off limits. Coming up, we reveal the results of our mega poll, and politicians go head-to-head in the battle for the Red Wall. And why were we forced to empty chair reforms Lee Anderson? And of course, we'll take the temperature in Westminster with our political weather. Rishi Sunak says he was handed the worst hospital pass for any incoming Prime Minister. But does that bear out in fact? Today, we reveal the results of our Sun mega poll. The Tories are trailing Labour by 21 points in our Savanta Super Survey. The PM is caught in a pincer movement. Reform on the right, Labour to the left. Polling guru Sir John Curtis says there's a 99% chance Sir Keir Starmer is the next Prime Minister. But Sunak insists there's still hope. Tonight, the Sun takes the temperature of the nation. Is all hope lost? And who's to blame for the mess? We find out. This is Never Mind The Ballots. Now, joining me to discuss the Sun's mega poll is Chris Hopkins from Savanta and the Sun's political correspondents Martina Bett and Sophia Slay. Chris, Sir John Curtis, a different polling guru to yourself, says 99% chance Keir Starmer is the next Prime Minister. Do you agree?
I mean, it's nice to be called a polling guru. I think that might be the first time. I'm not sure I'd put a percentage chance on it quite like that. I think ultimately, if we want to look at that, probably our betting markets, frankly, are the best place to go. But time's running out for the government to turn this round, and I think what we're showing in our most recent polling is just an increased Labour lead.
So let's have a look at that Labour lead. 21 points, Labour on 45, Conservatives on 24, Reform on 12, Lib Dems on 10. Now, that Reform number is a little bit lower than some other pollsters. Is that a glimmer of hope, or is it a different methodology?
Different methodology, frankly. We don't include Reform in our initial prompt, like a lot of the pollsters that are showing them on 15, 16. I think there's been a poll out today. I mean, that's a House decision, one that we might review. But at the minute, Reform still feels like a bit of an enigma to us, particularly at Savanta. But I think to pollsters in general, we just haven't seen the electoral evidence that they're on 12% or on 15%. Maybe the local elections will change that. But at the minute, they are feeling like a bit of a mixed bag for pollsters, and we're not quite sure how to treat them.
One thing is clear and stark, is that Labour lead. Do you think that's sort of unassailable now? Have you ever seen a lead like that be overcome in an election?
Yeah, I mean, it's feeling unassailable. I think that's really points to some of those comments that John Curtis made. I think, again, at Savanta, we've tended to be on the smaller side of Labour leads, again, possibly down to some slight methodological differences with other pollsters. But what we have shown over the last couple of weeks is increasingly large Labour leads. I think this is our largest one since September 23. We've come off the back of a 20-point lead. That was our largest one since September. 18 points, that was our largest one since September. So really, we're only moving in one direction, and that direction at the minute is just increasingly bleak for the government.
So last summer, don't correct me if I'm wrong, it looked like Rishi Sunak was going in the right direction. The Tories were nudging back up towards the 30 points in the polls, putting them perhaps in play for the next election. And now with that, now Rishi Sunak's back down to sort of levels not seen since Liz Truss, and we all know how that ended. Yeah, he says, he inherited this hospital pass. Does that bear out in the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you'd have asked me that a few months ago, I would have probably agreed. And I think that it was fair to say a couple of months ago that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were more to blame for the Tories' current predicament than Rishi Sunak was. I don't think that's the case anymore. At least I don't believe that Rishi Sunak can completely absolve himself of blame anymore.
Because this is on his watch, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He's had plenty of time now, frankly. And I think that what's really kind of coming through in some of the data is that the Conservatives are in this predicament because they have a record of not delivering on things, whether that's Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, including Rwanda and stopping the boats.
Yeah.
But no matter what the rhetoric, no matter what some of the things that he says, which should in theory appeal to his voters, if he's being seen to not be acting on any of them, then both those voters that agree with his immigration stance aren't going to like it, and those that disagree with his immigration stance definitely aren't going to like it. So
making promises he hasn't delivered has actually hurt him.
I think that's really hurt him particularly.
If we drill down into the data a little bit, though, it does say that Rishi Sunak is, is he mostly to blame for the current state of the party? 35%. That's quite a big chunk, but 50% say previous leaders are mostly to blame. So there is a little bit of fairness in that, hospital pass argument, isn't there?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's all well and good inheriting a hospital pass, but it's what you do with it ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think, when there was optimism when Rishi Sunak came to power. I think, we did the focus group the week that he became Prime Minister of Conservative switches, Conservative 29 switches, and they weren't convinced that he was necessarily going to be the person to win their vote back, but they did feel at least a bit sorry for him. They felt that he was the best person to manage the Conservatives into this next election. I don't think they'd say the same thing anymore.
52% say that he's been let down by others in his party. That's, presumably that's the squabbling Tory tribes, right?
Yeah, and probably also previous leaders. I think we have to look back over the course of the last 4 years to see that it was Partygate that really started to move things, and then the Labour lead went astronomical during the Truss era.
Do you think that any Tory Prime Minister, really, the scale and size of that 2019 coalition, a fairly phenomenal group of people from the Red Wall to seats in the South, Brexit and Corbyn, that combination, could any leader really hold this together?
I think it's increasingly unlikely that any leader could. I think the Conservative brand really now is through the floor, and it would be incredibly difficult for any leader to come and take that back. I think that it's incredibly challenging for Rishi Sunak to kind of thread this impossible needle where they're bleeding votes to the left in the Labour Party and the right in Reform. So it's hard to know what strategy to put into play to win one of those voter sets back, because whichever one you do win back, you're going to alienate maybe more to the other side.
I think the stat that will send a chill down the spine of Downing Street strategists for me is 8 out of 10 voters, 82%, say they're unlikely to change their mind. Now, is that a little bit of voter shyness, or is that they are so angry with the Tories it doesn't matter, it's game over? Or do you think people say they won't change their mind, but then they do?
Yeah, look, the sensible kind of political scientist pollster hat on me will say people are very bad predictors of their own behaviour. Changing your mind is socially undesirable. So there's going to be a bit of social desirability bias in there. There's going to be a little bit of people just not really understanding their propensity to change their mind. But I think it does still speak to the doldrums that the Conservatives are in. I think it speaks to the fact that, they may have lent the Conservatives their vote in 2019, but they're unlikely to now win it back. And I think we've seen that in some other stats that imply that just sort of, a very small percentage of those that have abandoned the Tories think that they might possibly even vote for them at this next election.
Keir Starmer, just quickly, Keir Starmer head-to-head with Rishi Sunak is 9 points clear, 38 to 29. I can remember polls not that long ago that were showing those two neck and neck, with don't know being a big thing. Is that moving away from the Prime Minister in a big way now?
I think we've seen a relatively stable kind of 9 to 12 point lead for Keir Starmer for quite a while. We've shown consistent Starmer leads since May, basically. I don't think Sunak has overtaken Starmer since May 23. Those leads started off at like 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, and now they're at 9, 12, 10 consistently. It appears relatively irreversible. Things can change, campaigns can change things. We saw that in 2017. But at the minute, polling is ultimately a nowcast, and yeah, this definitely implies that there'd be a Tory wipeout.
Let's remind us of those top lines of the voting intention. Labour 45%, Conservative 24%, Lib Dems 10%, Green 3%. Not a great look for the government, is it, Martina?
No, definitely not. But if I may, Chris, I just wanted to ask you this that I picked out. So you analysed Labour switches, and apparently 6 in 10, so 60% say it's a vote for Labour rather than against the Conservatives. And of course, throughout the last few months, we heard that actually there's not enough love for Labour out there. But this shows a different picture.
Yeah, I mean, I've found this stat probably if I was to pick one stat out of this that I found the most surprising, I think this might be it. And I think that ties into this narrative that there is a little bit of ambivalence or maybe indifference towards the Labour Party. That said, there's a lot of vitriol and anger towards the Conservative Party, and I think that ultimately contributes to that figure. I do think it's interesting that while 6 in 10 con to Labour switchers say that it's a vote for Labour, 86% of con to Reform voters say it's a vote for Reform. So perhaps there is still some more anti-Conservative rather than pro-Challenger sentiment among those Labour switchers than Reform switchers, but still, I think that stat is still pretty telling.
Sophia, I mean, does this chime with what you're hearing from MPs? And has reality sunk in yet for large parts of the Conservative Party? This poll tonight shows that Labour are ahead on tax, on small boats, on immigration. Are MPs aware of quite how bad this is looking?
Oh, I don't think they are, to be totally honest with you. And I think this poll will actually shock quite a few of them. I mean, they know it's bad. The thing they keep saying to me is, Sophia, there's lots of undecided voters out there, but this poll has basically set fire to all of that. Their strategy, relying on undecided, says, this has just set fire to all
Chris,
of that.
is that in that crucial 2019 Tory cohort, the people that gave Boris Johnson that massive majority, is there, Sophia, right? Is there any, well, the MPs, right, sorry, is there any room for movement there?
Look, things can change, but I think there will need to be action from the government to enable that change rather than just relying on a increasingly small, frankly, bunch of voters that might have not quite made their mind up yet or might have not quite decided that the Conservative Party are completely not for them. I think that some of those that have switched maybe could go back, contrary to perhaps to some of this, if they see some action. But that is the biggest if in British politics at the minute, frankly, and it seems increasingly unlikely.
And they might not go back in time for this election. It might be they're not completely ruling out going back to the Tory party one day, but they're going to sit this one out, or they're going to actively vote against.
Yeah, I mean, that's what our polling shows. I think it's 8% of those that did vote Conservative at the last election and now have a different voting intention or are undecided say that they might still vote Conservative at the next election. Half of them say that they might vote Conservative at some election, but not this one. Yeah. All is not lost for the Conservative Party, but I still, like long term that is, but I still think that of that proportion that say they might come back eventually, they're very split between those that are more inclined to go to the Labour Party and more inclined to go to Reform. Therefore, it's really difficult to have one unified strategy to bring that whole group back.
And is that going to hurt? Is that going to hurt Keir Starmer? Is that the fact that he's not winning over those Reform votes and it's slightly split that some are going to Labour, sure, but not all of them. Some of them are going to Reform. Is that going to hurt Keir Starmer, or is that just going to hurt the Tories and send him on his way with an even bigger majority?
I think it's wrong to assume that every single Reform voter is just a Tory in disguise, frankly, and if Reform didn't stand in a seat, that would just automatically gift the Conservatives those votes. But I think ultimately Reform are a massive help if these numbers play out to Keir Starmer, because some of those Labour con marginals, which perhaps aren't in play, if Reform take a massive chunk of that Conservative vote, then maybe they are more in play for the Labour Party, and that is probably what some seat modellers would perhaps think is making these majorities that some people are almost predicting seem even larger, in the 200 seat mark maybe.
Martina, the Easter breakers couldn't come soon enough for Downing Street. The MPs are now scattered back across the country. They're not in the corridors of power and in the bars lurking around plotting. But what do you think is going to happen, if this poll plays out in terms of the local elections? How bad do you think it could get for the Prime Minister in the immediate aftermath?
I think quite bad. I mean, we know that there are a few people that are actively trying to depose the Prime Minister. Obviously, maybe not as many as some people thought, but
they're very vocal journalists are the one that do those.
Exactly, and there's not love for the Prime Minister out there in the Conservative Party. People say, we heard from Ben Wallace saying, "Let's march towards the guns." I mean, it's not great. It's not a great look. So there's not love for Rishi Sunak out there in the Conservative Party. Things could get worse for him. And as Chris said, the biggest problem is that he's not delivered on those pledges that he made last year.
Sophia, do you think he's, May danger zone? Do you think he could just, we've been seeing lots of speculation, not least started by me in my column last week, that if it looking really bad for the locals, he could call the election in June rather than try and wait to October. What are you picking up on that?
I think that is an option, but I mean, a lot of MPs are aware that should they try and topple Rishi Sunak, it will look completely bonkers to voters. Yeah. How many prime ministers we had in the last 4 or 5 years? I think the cut through on that will be astronomical and embarrassing, actually, to the ordinary voter.
Is that right, Chris? Things could get worse, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I made a prediction around conference season last year that I didn't think Rishi Sunak would necessarily lead the Conservatives at the next election. I think that's more down to Conservative MPs and their tendencies rather than whether they think it's a wise electoral strategy. I don't think that voters would reward a fourth Conservative Prime Minister in 4 years. I think it would make things even worse. But I understand this tendency within certain wings of the Conservative Party to maybe think, well, Rishi Sunak isn't doing it. Time is massively running out. Let's roll the dice. What have we got to lose? Well,
it'll certainly keep us busy. Thank you, Chris Hopkins from Savanta, our pollster for today. And thank you to our political correspondents from Sun. We'll be seeing you shortly. Coming up after the break, it's the Battle of the North as we pit two very different Tory MPs against each other and a Labour Red Wall casualty. I'm Harry Cole. This is Never Mind the Ballots. Leader of the Labour Party. Next week, you'll hear from the leader of the Conservative Party, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Today, we want you to have the chance to hear from Reform and its only MP, the Tory defector Lee Anderson. Reform say they're going to stand candidates across the land, and you'd think they'd want to try and win over Sun readers. But after agreeing to come on today's show, Lee has now pulled out at the very last minute. So, here's the empty chair he was meant to sit in. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on how interested he really is in gaining your support at the election. But a very warm welcome to One Nation Conservative MP, Matt Warman, the former Labour MP, Jenny Champan, and the chair of the Northern Research Group, all the way from Lancashire, Sir Jake Berry. Baroness Jenny Champan, you lost your seat in Boris Johnson's Red Wall wave. Do you think that Keir Starmer, a London lefty lawyer, has what it takes to win back the North?
Oh, absolutely he does. I mean, the reason I backed Keir for leader in 2019 is because I knew that people in Darlington would look at him and they'd think, yep, that's a Prime Minister, in a way that they just never, ever did about Jeremy Corbyn. I was knocking doors, December 2019. People were saying to me, I'm not voting Labour because I don't like your leader. And I would say, who do you like? Who do you want? Who do you see leading the Labour Party? And the answer I got back more times than anything else was Keir Starmer. That's why I backed him. That's why he's doing so well in the Red Wall.
Even though this was a man that spent 3 years trying to undo the Brexit result, he wanted a second referendum. How's he going to win over people that just don't trust him on Brexit?
So the first thing Keir said when, in his very first interview with Christopher Hope, after he got elected as leader, was, I want to listen and understand why people voted for Brexit. So what he's done with the Labour Party since then, we're not going back into the EU, we're not going into the customs union, we're not joining the single market or any of that. He's heard what people were saying, he agrees with it, he understands our future is outside the EU, and people look at him and they think, yeah, he's good enough to do that job.
So why is it then that some polls are showing that more 2019 Tory voters are going to Reform than are going to Labour?
But
surely something's wrong there.
But they are 2019 Tory voters, aren't they? And they will.
They're the people that gave Boris Johnson his massive majority there.
They are, but you also look at polls and you see that the Labour Party's further ahead in the Red Wall than it is in the rest of the country. So, you know, we are in no way complacent at all about this election. You're smiling at me, but I'm deadly serious.
John Curtis says there's a 99.9% chance Labour will win.
But no one's voted yet, have they?
No, they
so
haven't.
we are not complacent at all. But the reason we've got to the place we have is because Keir Starmer's turned the Labour Party around and people can see it. And they think, you know what, there's a guy with good, clear leadership who's done what he said he would do with the Labour Party. You know, he's taken some flack to do it, but he's done it. He's stuck to his guns. And they think he's the sort of person that they want to see leading the country.
So, Jake Berry, some people call you the OG Red Waller. You took your seat off of Labour in 2010, I think it was. You've got a hell of a fight on your hands to keep it, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I never take the voters of Rosendale and Darwin for granted, Harry, and that's why I'm out knocking on doors and talking to them about what they want me as their MP to focus on. But just picking up on one of the questions you asked Jenny, like when you go across the Red Wall, I mean, I am literally amazed. I'm not saying you are not right, but I am literally astounded that in 2019, people on the doorsteps were saying, oh, if only Keir Starmer was the leader of the Labour Party, we'd definitely vote Labour. Because he is the leader of the Labour Party now, Jenny. And no one's ever heard of him. And they don't, and in my part of the world, they sort of say, we don't really know what he stands for. He's changed his mind so many times. And in terms of the Red Wall, he is the man who, you know, represents 2 tube stations as his constituency in London. And I don't think that he cuts through in the north of England at all, actually.
So, Jake, sorry, I'll come back in a second, Jenny. But so, Jake Berry, how's Reform in your patch? Are they breathing down your neck? Some polls have them overtaking the Tories in your part of the world.
Well, they're not very active, Harry, so I can't really say
they're not very active here today either.
No. Hello, Lee. No, they're not very active. But that doesn't mean lots of people won't vote for them. I don't take it for granted for 1 second. But if Lee had turned up, what I would have said to Lee is, look, you know, he is a colleague. I like him, or he was a colleague. I like him. I'm actually very sorry to see him leave the Conservative Party. And he used to believe, and I still believe, even if you agree with some of the tax policies that Reform say that they'd like to see, I think the 20% flat rate of tax, I think we'd all like to see that in the Conservative Party. But voting Reform or joining Reform just isn't the way you achieve it.
So, Jake, some people say, I was speaking to people that they're getting the feedback on the doorstep that even when you make that argument that, a vote for reform is a Labour government, people are so sick of your lot, they just want to give you a hiding, and frankly, they don't care if they get a Labour government. How do you battle that?
Well, I think you can kind of see in the polls that there's a bit of a plague on all your houses. If you look at the net favourability ratings of each of the leaders of each political parties, they're all in negative territory. Well, what that says to me is that we've all, including Keir Starmer, I know lots of people in national polls are looking to back Labour, we've all got a lot of work to do to set out a compelling vision for why we as Conservatives, or the Labour Party, in fact, it's not my job to do it for the Labour Party, why we deserve to take Britain forward. I've seen elections. Harry, your political editor of The Sun, you're a very experienced political journalist. You saw Theresa May.
Charm's not going to get you very
You
far
saw
here,
Theresa
Jake.
May. Let me finish. You saw Theresa May squander her electoral lead in a matter of days in 2017 in that election. You saw the Conservatives go from 8% in a national election in 2019 to winning the biggest Conservative majority later that year for a generation, at least since Margaret Thatcher. Things turn very quickly in politics. It's why Jenny is quite right not to be complacent. But it's also very foolish if anyone writes off the Conservative Party. We've got a lot of work to do. But I do think that we will set out that compelling vision.
Matt Warman, it's fair to say you are from a different wing of the Conservative Party, I think, from Jake Berry. You're the deputy head of the One Nation group, the left of the party. Are you concerned that a surge in reform is going to pull the party to the right?
Well, we've got to make the case that what reforms say is what the Conservative Party in many cases actually does want to deliver. We want to make sure we get a grip on small boats. We want to make sure we get a grip on the economy in the way that Jake has just described as well. But we can't do it overnight. And the reality is, I don't believe if Lee Anderson was sitting here, he would not be saying, I want Keir Starmer to be Prime Minister. None of those values are his values. But the reality is, if you vote for Lee, that's what you're going to get. So I think when voters come to look at these questions, they're not daft. We see time and time again in elections, there is a real focus on who is going to be the Prime Minister. I don't think people in the red wall, in my part of the world, in the blue wall, want to see Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. The idea that he's somehow captured the nation is plainly nonsense on the doorstep. There's a lot of work to do, but I don't think anyone should be writing off the Tories right now.
You were a Remainer. You represented one of the most Brexity seats in the country. You obviously have slightly different views, I think, from a large part of your constituents. Got any advice for Keir Starmer on how a Remainer can win over the Brexit heartland?
So what I said to constituents in the referendum and beyond was, look, I will absolutely respect your views. It was always clear how the constituency was going to vote. And the answer is you've got to be straight with people. And that's the big problem that Keir Starmer faces. He hasn't been straight with his own party when he was running for leader. He said that he would respect huge parts of Jeremy Corbyn's programme. He then binned that the second he became leader. He then backed Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister earlier on. So there is such a total lack of integrity there. And we've got to be honest about that. You've got to have someone who is diligent and has some principles. That's not what any of my voters see in Keir Starmer.
Baroness Chapman, your close ally, Sir Keir Starmer's got no principles, and what, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just not true. Keir Starmer...
He did dump his commitments to support Jeremy Corbyn's agenda. He did support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Both of those things are facts.
I am aware what he said when he stood to be leader. I chaired his leadership campaign. And the reason I did that is because I see in Keir, and the voters will make up their own minds, they will look at him and they will decide if he's good enough to be the Prime Minister of this country. And I think most people who are looking at him now and looking at what the Tories have had to offer, and they're deciding that, yes, Keir Starmer actually is good enough to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And I agree with them. And what they see is a man who has done what he said he would do in the Labour Party. He has turned it around. He inherited a burning skip of a party in 2019. Everybody was telling him and telling all of us that this was at least a 2-term project. What's he done? He's got them in a fit shape to be electable to run the country today within 1 term of Parliament. That's never been done before. And he's somebody who's got the integrity to do that. And so, you know, there are things that were said during the leadership campaign, and there are things that have been said before 2019.
Well, there's things been said recently, like the 28 billion, which was suddenly just...
The reason all of that's happened is because you've got someone who's serious about governing. They're not serious about managing their own party or keeping in with various interest groups or being popular on marches. He is serious about governing the country. And that's why people are looking at him and saying, yes, I'm happy to vote for him.
One thing we pick up in talking to our readers and polling is there's this idea that there's not a huge amount of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer other than he's not the other guy. Lee Anderson used to be a Labour member.
Yes,
you'd expect him to have defected back to Labour if Labour were really representing the views of his seat in Ashfield. Why do you think he chose not to come back to Labour but rather go to Reform?
Ooh, you're asking me to get into the head of Lee Anderson. That's too much for me. I don't know.
What's your message to Reform voters, though? What are the messages to people that are looking at that choice? What is the message to voters that are looking to that choice? They don't want to vote Tory. They're sick of the Tories. They want to change a government, but they're not sure about Labour. Lots of them are going to Reform. What is it that Keir Starmer is missing, do you think?
I think some of them are going to Reform. I don't know what's inside people's heads when they do that. But what I would say to those people is look at the economy and look at the money in your pocket, look at the taxes that you're being paid, that you're paying, look at the quality of public services you're getting, whether that's the length of time you're waiting for health treatment, look at the education your kids are getting, look at your mortgages, and really ask yourself who would be better to lead the country over the next 5 years, the Conservative Party or the Labour Party? And I think more and more people, they are looking at Reform, and of course they are. We live in a democracy, thank God. But they're actually saying, you know what, I think the Labour Party's got what it takes to do what we need to have done for this country for the next 4 years.
So, Jake Berry, you're still there. What would you say to voters in your patch that are making that decision? A vote for Reform, or what is the Tory party possibly offering people that just want to give you a kicking anyway?
Well, I mean, what do I say to the voting Reform? I tend to talk about all the good things that the Conservative Party is doing, because it's frankly not good enough after you've been in power.
What, really? What is your go-to? What is your go-to list of good things the Tory party have done?
I'll tell you. Once you've been in power for 14 years, it's not good enough to say the Labour Party would be worse. They would be worse. If you're worried about your taxes being high, they'll be higher under Labour. If you're worried about your mortgage being high, they'll be higher under Labour. If you're worried about services being worse, they'll be higher under Labour. But that's not good enough. You've got to talk about a record of delivery as well. And interesting that Jenny picked up on education, because education is one of the great success stories of this Conservative government.
And what about mortgage rates, Jake?
Ever before in high-quality schools. And as a parent myself with 3 kids, things like that really matter. If you've got children and you want free childcare, our plan to deliver free childcare really, really matters to people. And that's what the Conservative Party needs to do. We don't need to be shy of the fact that we were the party who delivered Brexit. We were the party who tackled the COVID pandemic. We're the party who's delivering first-class education for your kids. We need to talk about our record, but ultimately, every election isn't necessarily about what you've done. It's a referendum on your future. And that's why I say the really important thing that both political leaders have to do, but particularly for me, my leader, Rishi Sunak, is come out with a compelling vision for the future. And if we do that, as we have done many times before, I hope and believe that people will judge us on our record, the risk of Labour, and what we're going to do for them in the future.
Just on Rishi Sunak, so Jake Berry, you've been fairly critical of the Prime Minister. You served at Liz Truss's side. Rishi Sunak managed to get the polls back to 30% last summer, back to where they were, when the Tories still had a fighting chance, you might say. However, they're now back down to where Liz Truss was when she was ousted after the disastrous 49 days. What's gone wrong for Rishi Sunak, and what is your advice to him, and how can he really turn it around, or is it too late?
Well, I started off I don't want to repeat my previous answer, setting out, 2 occasions that I know over my 14 years in Parliament and my 30 years as member of the Conservative Party almost, where, polls have been turned around very quickly. So my advice to the Prime Minister was, would be, if he's listening, I hope, hello, Rishi,
I'm sure he is.
Absolutely, we can do this, Prime Minister, would be my advice to him. But when I go knocking on doors, and I've been out campaigning with our brilliant local government candidates up across my constituency the last week or so, and I'll be doing it again the day after tomorrow. What people behind the doorstep tell me is they want the governing party to get on and govern, to concentrate how we change and improves people's lives. They hate all this infighting and all this sort of questions over leadership. So my advice to myself and all of my colleagues and to the Prime Minister is let's get on with it. You know, as Ben Wallace said, strap on our uniforms and take the fight to Labour.
Yeah, I think he said march towards the sound of gunfire.
He almost said that.
March towards the sound of gunfire.
Ben Wallace is like a First World War general. He's not standing the election. He's 30 miles behind the lines drinking Pomerol in a chateau issuing orders.
I thought he was a mate of yours. Wow. Matt Warman, are you cannon fodder for Rishi Sunak's disastrous election prospects?
No, not at all. I think what every Tory MP has got to do is get out there and say, look, there is, as Jake said, whether it's education, whether it's the grip we've got on inflation, there is a record to be proud of out there, and there is a plan for the future. And that obviously has to come not just in the manifesto, but before.
Your colleagues are gearing up to get rid of the Prime Minister, or attempt to get rid of the Prime Minister after the May local elections. You know, look at the polls. You can't survive this, can you?
I think you've got to be realistic. There are a couple of people who have stuck their head above the parapet and said that they want to see a change.
Screaming iceberg. You don't see the iceberg.
The vast majority of the Tory party wants to see Rishi Sunak leading us into that election because of that record and because we've got to get that plan that speaks to people and says, because of the economic record, because of the improving picture in lots and lots of ways, there is a reason to be positive. And if you want to find a reason to be negative, look at Labour's record in Wales, look at bankrupt Birmingham. There are plenty of reasons to be worried about a Labour government, and they are not just fictional, they are what's happening right now in parts of this country.
Do you think, isn't it not the problem that everything that Rishi Sunak really needs to do, like get tough on immigration, really sort of take the fight to the European Convention on Human Rights, your wing of the party have basically got him held captive and he's not able to do anything? So
I think that's true at all. I mean, I've said in Parliament, I want to see the ECHR reformed properly, not just fiddling around the edges, proper changes that make it work, not just for us, but for refugees themselves and for other countries around the world. So there is real work to do. You look at what Rishi Sunak's achieved with the Windsor Framework, with a whole host of other globally significant negotiations. I think he could deliver that, and it would work better, as I say, for refugees, for the UK, and for countries around the world.
Jenny Champan, you're looking forward to being back in government, I'd imagine, but it's just going to be more fights with the Labour Party, isn't it? You've got a very vocal left who are going to be very powerful if Keir Starmer is in power, setting the direction of the party. Looking forward to all this fun and games?
I think the Labour Party has never been more united, actually.
Oh, come on.
And
they just had 10, they had 15 ministerial resignations.
In government, you look at our new candidates that we have now, and you see a cohort of people who are going to be excellent parliamentarians.
Purged out all the baddies, then.
I would never use that language, Harry. But what we've got is a group of people who really want to win for the benefit of the country. And they're capable, they are professional people who want to take, and who are of their communities, and they want to do the right thing for the country. And I think you've got that sort of coherence and that discipline in the Labour Party, which I admit you have not always had. I have been where Matt is. I have been part of a political party in absolute turmoil on the brink of certain defeat. And I know what that's like. And
so what's your advice to them?
My advice is to just be honest with yourselves and with the electorate and do the hard work that needs to be done. And the problem with the Tory party is not Rishi Sunak. The problem is the Tory party and these various wings that love nothing more than kicking the shit out of each other. And that's what's going on, and that is turning people off. But I think the Labour Party in government, because you've got that clear leadership from Keir Starmer, who's not afraid to take the tough decisions when it comes to who serves.
The party line from Keir as well.
Then that is what people are seeing.
Final word from Lee Anderson. No, nothing to say, Lee? Because he's chicken. Final word, Jake Berry. You're not going to defect next, are you?
No, absolutely not. I am a Conservative. I don't just vote Conservative. I am a Conservative. I love my party. I love all of my colleagues from the One Nation group to the ERG. I just love everyone.
Yeah, I spend enough time in Parliament to know that the Tory party is not a loving right now. Thank you to my guests, One Nation Tory Matt Warman, former Labour MP Jenny Champan, and Sir Jake Berry, all the way from Lancashire. Thank you very much. Welcome back to Never Mind the Ballots. Joining me now, our two political correspondents, Martina Bett from The Sun and Sophia Slade from The Sun on Sunday. Sophia, what do you make of our battle for the Red Wall?
I thought it was a great battle, but what a shame Lee Anderson didn't see fit to turn up and speak to Sun readers.
One of his more articulate performances, I thought, of late.
That's one way of putting it. But you would have thought Reform would want to wheel out their, their big star, their big defection, Lee Anderson. You'd think that he would want to come and speak to us. You had Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, last week. I understand you've got the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak coming up soon. So you'd think if these people can come and talk to Sun readers, what is Reform running scared of?
It does feel like the Lee Anderson's position in Reform doesn't feel that comfortable. He sort of appeared at that press conference, which was a total, car crash, really. There was the flags in the way, there was reading off a laptop. He looked like it was a hostage video. He didn't look like he didn't want to be there. Do you think he's regretting his decision to defect?
I think there's an element when someone defects, you're a little bit lost. And I think he's probably still trying to find himself. He has defected quite a few times. He was a Labour man once upon a time. Then he became a Tory MP. And now he's Reformed. So he's probably still trying to figure out who he is or where he sits, even politically. He's had quite a few transformations over the last few years.
Reform are soaring, in the polls, as we saw earlier. Is it credible, do you think, for their only parliamentarian to run away from the media?
No, I don't think it is. And I think, they may not win any MPs at the general election, but actually they could be quite a force at the general election, losing, nibbling away at Tory MPs' majorities and effectively losing them their seats with Labour coming up through the middle. So actually they might turn out to be quite an important electoral force. And we saw it in by-elections, I think Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire, you saw them nibble away at the Tory vote there and actually other parties come up through the middle. So they will be an important force.
We've got the Blackpool by-election coming up where they need to do very well. Martina, Tory harmony, it was all smiles in that battle for the Red Wall there, but you could tell the tensions there between the One Nation lot and Jake Berry.
Absolutely. I mean, Matt Warman kept saying that it's just one or two Tory MPs. They're whipping up all this story about the Prime Minister possibly being deposed. And then Jake Berry said he loves every single one of his colleagues. But I thought it was funny that just a minute earlier, he slacked off Ben Wallace.
Yeah, that was an astonishing thing.
Saying,
what was it? That he
said that he was the First World War officer standing 30 miles behind the line, drinking Pomerol in his chateau. And I mean, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Ben Wallace, but I'm sure he probably isn't very pleased of that comparison.
But even the One Nation lot seem to be saying that something's got to give on boats, on immigration. Matt Warman, he's of the left of the party, but his comments about the ECHR were fascinating.
Yes, it was very fascinating, I thought. And remember, the Prime Minister last year decided to stand in front of the electorate and pledge to stop the boats. No one would have blamed him if he just said, I'm going to crack down on the boats. But he said, let's stop the boats. And look how it's going. I mean, 10% more boats crossings are up by 10%. And I think even the left of the party are realising that he's got to do more to tackle illegal migration.
Surely he's left it too late for any meaningful reform with the Strasbourg court, though, in this time frame. It's going to be a manifesto commitment.
Definitely. I think that could very much be a manifesto commitment. I think Lord Cameron, the House of Lords, was talking about the ECHR, and now in the past he's tackled, he tried to reform it, and I think we could very much see that being part of the Tory manifesto.
So there's an amazing moment where Jenny Champan seemed to claim that there was a sort of outpouring across the Red Wall in 2019 for Sir Keir Starmer to be the Labour leader. Do you buy that?
That did tickle me quite a bit, actually. I mean, I remember 2019 vividly, and I remember a different type of Keir Starmer. I remember, Keir Starmer writing in newspapers, effectively calling for a second referendum. He was a bleeding heart Remainer. He was a very different type of politician, I think, back then. So I was quite surprised to hear that his name was coming up on the doorstep in the Red Wall. Unprompted. I wasn't even hearing that in London. And, I've been in the Red Wall vox popping recently, stopping people in the street and asking them what they think about Labour. And, there's not a big love out there for him. People are obviously swinging towards Labour and wanting to vote Labour, but it's not amazing Starmer, we love him, he's our big hero. So I'm surprised to hear that was being said in 2019 on the doorstep.
And talking of Labour, Angie Rayner's been out today, seems to be making matters worse on her tax affairs and the story about her two homes. What's the latest?
Yeah, she had an interview this morning, and basically she was being really pressed on. Basically, the interview was saying, you've got to show us your evidence that you've done nothing wrong. She's under pressure for, she's being criticised and questioned over whether or not she should have paid capital gains tax on her property, and whether or not she broke electoral rules. And she's kind of, sort of her answer to all the questions is, look, I've had independent advice, tax advice.
But she won't publish that.
And that exonerates me.
And Keir Starmer sat right there last week and said he hasn't seen it.
Yeah.
So Martina, is it a credible line? Is it going to hold?
No, I don't think so. And I don't understand why she would just not make this go away by publishing the tax advice. And this morning she was saying how she wouldn't demand people to see the 15 years of tax
No one's asking to see 15 years of it. They're only asking to see the tax advice that she got last month. Yeah.
Exactly. And if she says that it's a question about privacy, I think Sir Keir last week said it was an issue about her son, the privacy around her son. Why not just take out the stuff about her son and publishing the tax?
Yeah, exactly. Would Angela Rayner put up with these excuses from Angela Rayner if Angela Rayner was a Tory?
Absolutely, no, absolutely. And we've seen it when she was a shadow cabinet office. She would write letters after letter demanding openness, transparency from politicians, and now she's in the hot seat and she's not doing the same. How
much damage do you think this will do to her, Sophia? Obviously, there's people in the Labour Party that don't like her that much already. She's locked in a battle with Rachel Reeves about workers' rights. Is there any chance that Keir might use this just to gently wash his hands of his troublesome deputy?
He might have to if it carries on like this. I mean, you know, Angela Rayner, a year ago, she was vowing to stop the rot and come up with a new watchdog in Westminster to clamp down on, you know, ministers' ethics and things like that. You know, if she does become a minister in a government, you know, she's going to be held to account by this new body that she wanted to create. So it's going to be...
Hoisted by her own petard.
Exactly, yeah.
You might call that. And is Starmer, how's Starmer playing this? Is he, you know, he talks about sort of, you know, the buck stops with the leader and a new sort of clean up in politics, as you mentioned. Is he going to crack down on this? What do you reckon?
Well, he said that he takes their word.
Great, brilliant. We'll have to say, well, that's that. Case closed. No further questions.
It does put him in a difficult situation now because there's lots of questions.
Mr. Rules, I think he once called himself, the QC as he was then, and the prosecutor extraordinaire. But guys, thank you very much. We'll be joining again, hopefully when the Prime Minister's here next week, and more to chat soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, who's hot and who's not in Westminster? We'll get the political weather with the Sun on Sunday's Kate Ferguson. I'm Harry Cole. This is Never Mind the Ballots. Now, it's time to get the political weather with the Sun on Sunday's very own Kate Ferguson. How's it looking out there, Kate?
Thanks, Harry. Hello and welcome to the political weather, where I will be taking the temperature of things in Westminster. We will see who's causing a political storm, which MP is hot right now, and who is in the deep freeze. Well, it is officially spring. Outside, the daffodils are blooming, and in Westminster, Labour have been basking in the glory of their massive poll lead. But behind the scenes, are storm clouds gathering? I hear Sue Gray, Keir Starmer's powerful new Chief of Staff, has been causing some moods to darken among her Labour colleagues. She's been busy poaching staff from some members of Labour's front bench, including this woman, Louise Hay. Labour insiders tell me Sue is empire building and seen as the new powerful big boss in party HQ, a woman you must not cross, causing tensions with some other big beasts. So, things may be bright for Labour now, but could these simmering tensions break out into a full-blown storm before too long? And Sue is not the only person causing drama in Labourland. Peter Mandelson, this guy, had been one of Keir Starmer's biggest cheerleaders, even hailing him the heir to Blair. But things are getting icy between the Dark Lord and Labour HQ. First, Lord Mandelson accused Starmer of being porky and said he needed to shed a few pounds. Recently, he warned against Labour's flagship policy of more workers' rights and greater trade union power. In a decidedly chilly article, he urged Labour not to rush the reforms in case they spooked business. One shadow cabinet minister I spoke to this week rolled their eyes and said Mandy would be better off keeping his opinion to himself. It seems Peter is on thin ice indeed with Labour bosses at the moment. And finally, there is one political accessory which is most definitely hot right now. Margaret Thatcher had her famous handbag, and Labour's leading ladies Rachel Reeves and Bridget Phillipson have the power bob. And now, male MPs are all rocking thick-rimmed glasses. Rishi Sunak deployed these specs earlier this week in his end-of-term grilling with MPs. And Keir Starmer has been causing quite a stir with his new set of frames, including with our own Sun cabinet last week. So, as one Westminster insider said to me, it's the hot new must-have trend sending temperatures soaring in Parliament. Specs appeal. Back to you, Harry.
Thanks, Kate. Ryan, what do you think about my specs appeal?
Definitely suit you.
I'm not sure. Ryan Saby, Sun Deputy Political Editor, back on Never Mind the Ballots. Welcome. You saw Keir Starmer last week. We've heard from the people today. Next week, big tests for Rishi Sunak. What's he got to do to win over Sun readers? We've seen the numbers. They're not good.
Yeah, no, he's really got to turn things around really, really quickly. And I think if he wants to offer a brighter future to the British people, he has to go back to that conference speech. He said he was going to be the change candidate. Now he's actually got to offer some change and some hope. He seems to have abandoned that, but it's the only chance he's got of trying to cling on to some votes.
14 years in government. He served multiple prime ministers. That speech at that conference where he said, oh, I'm going to be the change, I'm going to be the change. He's going to tear up 30 years of political consensus. And then he brings back David Cameron, who couldn't embody more the consensus of the last 20 years in politics. You know, isn't he just slightly all over the place?
Yeah, no, exactly. He is, Dominic Cummings was talking about Boris Johnson being that trolley, and it seems like, you know, is Rishi Sunak almost taken on the mantle? But you look at decisions, has he acted quick enough on things like Frank Hester? Has he acted quick enough on Lee Anderson to make decisions when he moved? So I think Rishi Sunak has really got to sort of use these last few months to actually try and create a damage limitation exercise. It really feels like he's in that territory. It's not whether he's going to lose by 250 seats, it's whether he's going to lose by 100 or 125.
I mean, that chilling stat we discussed earlier in the show about 86% of voters think they've made up their mind. Yes, some of them, you know, might yet change their mind, but it's an uphill struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think if you look at all across the country, you look at the southwest, you've got the fight with the Lib Dems. You look at the Midlands and the north, and you've got the fight from the Reform Party. And that's not even including the fight, the head-to-head battle with Labour all throughout the United Kingdom.
So,
it'd be really tough.
What you're saying is the stakes couldn't be higher for his big show appearance on Never Mind the Ballots next week. What subjects do you think our readers are going to come? We're going to throw it open tonight to readers online in the paper. People can submit their questions. What are you thinking is going to come up?
I think you judge him against what he's tried to set out his premiership to be. It'll be things like the cost of living crisis, where people, do they feel better than they did 14 years ago?
The big question in Reagan politics, yeah.
Absolutely. And you throw it over to immigration. Are people happy with the levels of legal migration and illegal migration? I think we know the answer to that. And also the NHS. That is going to come to the absolute fore. It's a big battleground with Labour as we head to the election. Waiting times. Some are coming down, but a lot in the main, they're still pretty high, 7 million people on waiting lists. So he's got to tackle those big problems, or at least, as I say, offer some hope in the next 6 months that he can make things better.
I thought one of the moments of last week was when Keir Starmer interacted, I thought, really well with the Sun cabinet. In fact, my mum said it was the most normal she'd ever seen Keir Starmer. So I think that's a pretty good sum up of that situation. Do you think Rishi Sunak needs to talk to more people, normal people, connect more? We've seen him on the campaign trail a few times. He's been a bit awkward, frankly. Do you think that's going to be enough to sort of try and turn it around if they get him out there more?
He needs to get out there. But I look at what Rishi Sunak has done this week. Now, he may have been busy, working in Downing Street, but Keir Starmer has been out today doing, the launch of his local election campaign. It sort of feels like Rishi Sunak just needs to get out there more and more, connecting with more and more people. And I think the strategy is, if people can go and tell, tens and thousands of people that they've actually met him or seen him, perhaps he needs to do these big town hall meetings more and more just to sell himself and sell his vision.
Maybe we can take Never Mind the Ballots on the road with Leaders Meet the Readers.
Absolutely.
I think would be fantastic. Right, Ryan, you'll be here next week for the Prime Minister, and hopefully, as will Sun readers with their questions. As I said, you've heard from the Leader of the Opposition, you've heard from the Red Wall, and as we keep saying, next week, Rishi Sunak will be here, quizzed by the Sun's Cabinet. Submit your readers' questions at thesun.co.uk. Thank you very much for joining us. This was Never Mind the Ballots. Good night.